I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. Today I talked to Chris and Amy Schwartzenberger, who lead the church in Spokane, Washington. Chris and Amy share about losing Amy's dad to suicide her senior year of college, facing mental health crises, and living with an ongoing mental health condition, Amy's near-death experience delivering her third child, and how they've managed to adjust and grow through their challenges and trauma together while serving God in the ministry. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. I'm here with my wife, Pam Skinner. Baby, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here.
And I am really thrilled about today's program because this next couple we know from way back.
Yeah, we do. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like having Takeshi and Manami on the program, or people that we've known quite a few people over the years, but this couple's really special.
Mm-hmm. They are. And they're family.
They really are like family.
Yeah.
And it's Chris and Amy Schwartzenberger. And they, when we planted that church in Ashland, Oregon, self-supporting, remember, the church was so tiny. It was just first started with us.
7 people. It had 7 people.
I know. We had like 7 or 8 people just there. And we're like, hey, we need help on campus. We need like an intern.
Yeah. You said we needed to raise $14,000 when there were 7 people in the church for a campus minister. We all thought, oh my gosh.
I know it. And it was just like, how are we going to do this? And at the same time, who's going to want to take, like, that's all we had. We just had a little bit of pocket change, basically. Right. And we're like, we
need somebody great.
And yet, I don't know how it worked out. I think we were at a conference or something, and this young man said, I'd be willing to come to Ashland. And I mean, first of all, he's willing to come to Ashland. No one even knew where Ashland was back in the day. It was like, it's a little tiny town of 20,000 people. And yet he came down and he turned that place upside down.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, I was selling real estate, but he was working on campus in the campus ministry at a tiny little college called Southern Oregon University. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he just tore it up. I mean, it was great. I mean, there was another guy that came for the summer. His name was Nate Bigby. He leads a church in Corpus Christi, which was awesome. And he did a great job. But Chris came also and then stayed. And it's just such a cool story. I don't want to steal the thunder, but I think the thing that inspires me the most about Chris, I mean, there's a lot of things that inspire me, is his level of sacrifice for the kingdom. Yeah. I mean, he got barely any money. At times there was barely a place to stay. Mm-hmm. And yet he was so determined to serve God.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm just thankful so much for the impact he's had just on our kids, our family.
Oh my gosh.
Because not only the campus, but he worked with the youth. You know, he worked at Starbucks, and so like half the town knew who he was.
I know it.
Just those activities. I mean, I know he could share about it, but yeah, all the activities that he did with the youth was really, really powerful.
I know it. Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to talking to him.
Yeah, me too.
And, it's just been really an exciting fall, but I'm looking forward to talking to Chris and Amy. Chris and Amy, welcome to the program.
Hey guys.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having us.
I know it. Just sitting there going, wow, it's amazing. But let me just ask you guys this question. How'd you become Christians?
Well, I was baptized in October 2003. I was a college senior at Eastern Washington University. I got met my junior year, and I was part of a tiny campus ministry. Actually, it was a mission team. It had been a year old at the time when I got baptized, and I think I was the second guy that was baptized in that campus ministry. So I was just kind of wandering through life, working on campus, getting a degree in business, and I was just lost. It was probably some of the most unhappy times in my life were right before I got met. And it was ironic because I showed up to church that first Sunday. It was an Easter Sunday. And I looked around, I recognized the two people who had invited me, but then I recognized like 5 or 6 other people in this church of 20. And I had a night class with one guy, 4 other people had reached out to me on campus. I had met somebody at Hastings, this store I used to work at. I'm like, I think God's out to get me because half this church has invited me to church and there's only 20 of them. I never stopped. That was in 2003, and I never stopped going to the church. And I got baptized in October after studying the Bible and kind of building some great relationships. So that's kind of where I was at when I became a Christian.
Wow.
Yeah. So I grew up kind of going to church my whole life. Was raised in a, God-fearing home. And, but I, I always wanted to, be in the in crowd. And so probably through high school and early college, I just got into partying and, boyfriends and all that stuff. So I was definitely like a party girl. And then after my freshman year of college, I was at Southern Oregon University. I just got really depressed one summer and I was like, this life is really empty. I didn't feel like this is how I wanted to live my life. I saw my parents and was like, oh, they have a happy marriage. I want, what they have. And so I started kind of going to a lot of different groups on campus. When I went back to school, I became an RA and saw honestly just a lot of hypocrisy on campus, like people that would go to, whatever their youth group or their campus group and then would be partying and swearing. And I was like, I'm really trying to change my life. And so I was frustrated by that. And then it was the summer going into my junior year that a girl was sharing, she was, inviting my friend, kind of one of my old party friends, to a Bible talk. And she was like, this friend was like, hey, why don't you talk to Amy about that? She's kind of more into like Christian stuff. So why don't you talk to her? And just kind of passed her off on me. And her name was Heidi Townsend. And she invited me out to Bible talk. And I almost didn't go, but then I did. And I was like, yeah, no, I said I was going to go. So I need to go. So I went and then started studying the Bible. And I think when I studied the Bible, I was just so impacted by the honesty and the realness with people being honest about their sin. I don't think anyone, even though I'd grown up going to church, had really spelled out what sin was. And so I was really convicted when I saw my own sin. And then obviously understanding, about God's grace through that, like that I could be forgiven for all those terrible things I felt guilty and ashamed about. And so, anyways, I definitely had a hard time realizing that I needed to get baptized, but luckily I humbled out and was like, I can't deny that all these scriptures are in here about baptism. So even if I feel prideful about this, like I need to get baptized. So yeah, I got baptized in August of 2006. And it's been, a wild journey, but so grateful that, God plucked me out of the world.
Wow.
That's awesome.
And that was in Ashland, yep. Oregon. Okay. Why did you choose Southern Oregon University?
It was the farthest away I could get from home without having to pay out-of-state tuition.
I love that.
That's just,
Be
that
honest.
Just shows where I was at.
Yeah.
Like, how do I escape my parents at that time? My mom ever listened to this? Sorry, Mom.
Yeah,
but,
honest and real.
That's always been your hallmark, Amy. That's for sure. No, okay. So this kind of all converges because it all connects. I mean, it's crazy. But Chris, and like I shared in the introduction, you really had a burning desire to be in the ministry. And you made some big sacrifices. What was driving you? And can you talk a little bit about those early days and how you got into the ministry and why?
Yeah. I mean, it was trying to figure out what was driving me back then. It was probably just like a feeling of insignificance in my career. I graduated in 2004. I'd been a Christian for a year, and I led a campus Bible talk after I graduated, and then finally kind of moved on to leading a singles group and was working a full-time job. But I found myself, I was being successful in my career. I advanced from like entry level to national director of marketing. By that third year, I was with the company and things were going really well, but I just felt like my mind was always on ministry stuff. And so I'd be working at work, but I'd be writing Bible talk ideas on notepad. Calling people or writing stuff down. I'm like, what am I doing with myself? Like, I'm good at this, but it's not really as fulfilling as ministry. And you kind of mentioned it in the open, or we had talked about it before, that in 2005, 2006, there weren't a lot of opportunities for ministry.
Right.
And especially for somebody like me, I'd been 2 or 3 years out of school. It wasn't like I was a campus intern, who was still taking classes. I was in my career. And so I had a shot through Seattle's church. Alex Whitaker put on an M&M program, Ministry and Missions, and was sending college students all over the place during the summer. And that's how Nate and Heidi and Jen got sent down to Ashland. And I just asked them, like, hey, can I go too? I'll take my 2 weeks vacation, see if I can get a couple weeks of sabbatical if you'll have me. And my bosses let me go. I found out when I got back, they actually had a couple of discussions whether or not they needed to keep me and fire me while I was on sabbatical. But God kind of crafted a plan. So I was there in Ashland for that 1 month in 2006 and had a great time. We tried to share our faith and go out, and Amy got baptized. It was a really enriching time. And then I went home and thought, well, that was it. That was my shot. And it was almost a year to the day that Rob called me. And, I was just working my job, leading the singles ministry. Our singles ministry was growing, and it was healthy, and it was exciting to have a great singles ministry where we had to kick college students out of our singles events because they were sneaking away from college events to come hang out with us. I thought that's
I love that.
The campus wants to be singles. That's a good place. And then Rob called me on I think a Monday and said, hey, we're looking to hire somebody. Would you be interested? Would you want to interview? And I got some advice. And I think I bought my plane ticket on Tuesday. I flew down on a Friday, met with the church and preached on a Sunday, flew back and quit my job on a Monday.
Wow.
I think it was a 7-day turnaround. And I just was driven. I felt like this was a shot and an opportunity that wasn't going to come along anywhere else. And, I really was confident God was with me when I told my parents, and my dad was supportive, to quit my job, to move out of the home that I bought 6 months earlier.
Wow.
And move down there. I just, I thought this is it. This is my shot to try ministry, and I got to take it. I was not as well aware of the financial stipulations.
Those discussions came afterwards.
Small print in the contract. But yeah, I quit my fairly well-paying corporate job, and luckily they kept me on for 6 or 7 months to kind of finish out the preparatory work for the next season. And so I was able to work and do ministry. But then I remember the time where I was, where that ended, and I was just fully reliant on the money that was raised every special mission. So, it's funny because you mentioned the word sacrifice. It didn't seem like sacrifice. It just seemed desirable. I think if you're looking for sacrifice, you're looking for the wrong place. If you're looking to be fulfilled and you just can't help but do something, that's where God really meets you at the road.
Yeah.
And I just kind of always said it, like, the guy I'm looking for is the guy that I was, the guy who's willing to sleep on the floor and just do it for the sake of doing it. I think that's where it's really at.
It's
Chris,
true.
I remember that first weekend you came down, not the first ever weekend, but when you came down to interview and to preach, and we were meeting at Lithia Park, and we were all circled around in our lawn chairs. Beautiful. I mean, that's just a beautiful place there. And you did such an amazing job. Everyone was talking about, this guy can really preach. And I remember the excitement.
Yes. Yeah. The church was so thrilled. I mean, I think the thing that I really respect is when I look back on that time, Chris, I mean, you didn't complain. I mean, I know you lived in the church building, but there was just such a joy and such a passion that you had about the ministry. And it was so refreshing to have you preach. And it was the perfect situation because you needed somebody that you could train, but also somebody who was super talented already. And Chris is a great preacher.
I mean, I can't, it's a little fuzzy to me, but I think at the time there'd been a leadership change. And so there was, it was a great opportunity for you to make a change, to come down and to come to Ashland, which was great. Now, you stayed in an apartment for a while. I remember that you're in a fourplex, and that was fine. It was, Okay. But then, okay, you let's talk a little bit about this. You ended up, there was a period of time you were staying in the church building. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Chris Schwartzenberger Memorial Room.
That's right.
Still there on East Main. Yeah, so like I said, I was working, and so I could afford rent. And then I stopped working, and luckily a brother from Seattle moved down for 3 months, and so I could still afford rent. But then when he moved back, I couldn't afford rent on my my ministry money. And I didn't want to be, the ministry was just starting to take root. And I was like, I don't want to get a job. It's going to distract. And so I remember the moment Rob and I were driving back, I think from Amy's dad's memorial. We were driving back from Portland. We're talking about, what are we going to do? Where am I going to live? And I think it was in a Mexican restaurant. We both went, you could live in the church building. I mean, it was almost one of those moments where it's like simultaneously like, this is the greatest idea ever. I don't think Pam and the other ladies thought it was the greatest idea ever. They were thinking through the logistics. For the listener, there was no shower. There was a bathroom and a kitchen, but I had to walk 2 miles to the YMCA to shower. Got in good shape because, you know, it's awkward walking into a YMCA, showering, and walking right back out. They definitely look at me at the front desk. But yeah, that was an adventure, but it created space. It created a time for me just to focus on ministry and not have a second job, you know, and I feel like God blessed that. I was crammed in a little, you know, 6 by 12 room and just lived there. I mean, I remember I had to get cut off on cooking on Wednesdays and Sundays because there was no ventilation in the kitchen. So whatever I cooked, everybody smelled. So no eggs, no fish, just no cooking. I was basically told no cooking on Wednesdays or Sundays. So I fasted a lot. It was great.
Oh my gosh.
The scariest moment was when I woke up to the entire Ashland's fire department in the parking lot. And I was pretty sure we weren't permitted to have me live there.
Right.
No.
I'm looking out my window and the entire fire department was there and they were I thought the building was on fire, but they were control burning the old parsonage next door. And I'm like, what do I do? I'm not supposed to be here. So I got dressed as professionally as I could. So it looked like I'd been working early, and I just walked out the front door, waved to him, and just walked down the road and didn't look back. And, it was a creepy old building, but I feel like God blessed it. It was a great time.
I know. I just really respected that. I mean, it was a kind of a home. I think the former church members, it was a Baptist church, and they had built it themselves. It was kind of like a home project. So it had some weaknesses. I remember one time we came back from a spring camping trip to the coast, and we came back and we opened up the front door and just water rushed out because the whole place was flooded. I mean, I think that happened once or twice. It could have happened twice. I can't remember exactly.
But we got new carpet. We got new carpet from that.
We did get new carpet.
Yes.
And but you're staying there. I mean, it was spooky at night. I mean, I remember you telling me there were like drug deals going down behind the building.
There was nothing. It was like an empty lot behind and an empty lot to the side, and then a highway with one house. I mean, there was nobody. It was very creepy and silent, and things happened in the parking lot. You'd see headlights come in and go out. I think I blocked a lot out of that memory. I'm having a little trauma now.
I remember you would definitely go over and spend time with my in-laws. And,
I had to do laundry at Dave and Jackie's. We would watch CSI or whatever show.
Oh yeah,
night,
yes.
Right in the middle of the couch and have a bowl of ice cream and fold my laundry. Yeah, it was a humbling time. Anybody else for some basic needs.
I appreciate your heart and level of sacrifice.
Yeah.
And I want to talk more about that early ministry period, but let's switch and talk a little bit about Amy.
Okay. Did you want to talk about how they met, or is that?
Okay. Yeah. Oh, of course. I missed. Thank you, baby.
Yeah. I mean, that's woo. Well, the sparks were flying.
I'll lead in and drop the first bomb, then let Amy take it from there. But I was actually dating Heidi when she baptized Amy the year before.
Right.
And,
drama.
So there's always that weird, stipulation people made a bigger deal of. But yeah, I moved back and it's a joke, but it was 2 sisters in the entire church that I could date. And no sisters for 4 or 5 hours in any direction. And so fell for Amy pretty quick. We became best friends. people call them weasel dates, but when you're in a campus ministry of 3, it's just called campus event. And when the church is 10, it's just called church. It's not a weasel date anymore. You're the only people in the same age demographic. But we had a great time, and I remember it was probably February. We were on Rob and Pam and I were going to a leadership retreat, and I call it the Pam Skinner, Why Amy is the Most Amazing Woman in the World car ride. Literally 2 hours of Pam telling me all the highlights. It was like ESPN top 10. I was convinced after that. So that was kind of my perspective. But Amy.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's cool just even thinking back of like, your guys' perspective on like hiring Chris. But me and Sandra, my best friend, who also became a Christian the same summer, we went to the Boston Campus Ministry Conference, and we were so inspired by campus ministries growing after that we both started praying and fasting once a week that we would have a guy come or like get baptized, or somebody that could kind of like actually make us have like a campus ministry that wasn't just a couple girls. And so then it was super encouraging when, they had Chris come down. And my secret prayer was also like, and, could he be someone that I could date?
Wow.
So that was like, I didn't tell Sandra that part. I was like, this is my little selfish prayer, God. Yes, we're praying for a campus leader. Maybe I could date him though. That'd be great. Yeah. He looked around and had 2 options. Yeah. I had 0 at the time. There was no brothers around. So we had to like drive to Seattle to go on encouragement dates. So anyways, so then Chris came down, and it was just the 3 of us hanging out all the time. So me and Chris became really close. There was definitely weasel dates, he's saying there wasn't weasel dates, but they're definitely weasel dates. My first leaders meeting kind of blew up, and he had to talk me off a cliff. Like, this isn't what leadership is always like. He had burrito. So that was like a good, hour and a half weasel date.
That was just good leadership. That was like not my first like traumatic leadership meeting. And I think Rob and Pam remember that meeting.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, this is Amy's first experience of a leaders meeting.
Mm-hmm.
You go debrief because she may not come back. This might be the end of it. So
that's right. Yeah. Okay, as I recall, are you referring that we had like a almost a church split? Right? Is that right?
That was it.
Yeah, it was the opening accusations that started that church split. And that was the first meeting.
Yeah. Oh, welcome to leadership.
Right. Sure. Amy was there for the first time. We're like,
really want this? So anyways, so we spent a lot of time together, and then I think it was always a little awkward because he had dated my friend. In the world, that's like a no-no. You don't date your friend's, ex-boyfriend or whatever. Right. So that was kind of like a hindrance, I think, for me to like get over that. And I think, he liked me, and then I was like, I don't know about this. And then actually, as always, I always joke that it was my jealousy. He started liking somebody else, and then I was like really upset. Mm-hmm. And then it really kind of revealed how I felt about him because I was really upset. He started liking somebody else. So that's when Pam intervened and gave him the Amy Schwartzenberger, or Amy Campbell at the time.
Yeah. 10 points.
Talk. Yep. So, but so then, we started dating shortly.
When did you guys start dating? When was this?
It was March of 2008.
Yeah.
Okay, so
because you got engaged on the camping trip, right? Is that true?
It wasn't.
We had our whirlwind of. We always tell our campus students, like, hey, just because we dated for 3 months and we're engaged for 3 months doesn't mean that's always like the best idea.
Right.
It worked for us.
And it worked for us.
It worked for you guys too. So it does work. But it's like, maybe you could slow down just a little bit.
Well, I think it was one of those things where you're looking at your life through a lens of ministry. Just want to do stuff for God. And that was it. It was like, all right, we're engaged. Like, we got to get married before school starts or on Christmas break, because we can't get married during school. We can't take a honeymoon during the campus break.
Right.
So So that's one of the reasons why everything was probably expedited a little bit was we had to get married, have a honeymoon before kickoff to fall campus, so but it was a great time. And, this is one of the reasons why I think, the Skinners and Schwartzenbergers are so intimately woven together was, Pam was orchestrating our love life and bringing us together and helping us have clarity to what we were really feeling. And we're indebted. I mean, our marriage is, been guided by you guys at that opening stage, and it was really, really important.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
It was about a month in that I was like, I want to marry him.
Can we move this along?
Yeah, let's date. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'll marry him.
That was such a special time.
It was.
Now, for those who are not familiar with the geography, because you're talking about having to go up and date in Seattle, can you talk a little bit about where Ashland is in relation to other places, and talk a little bit about kind of the geography, because that plays a big part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now the church meets there is now in Medford, but Ashland, Medford area is 8 hours away from Seattle. At that time, there was no kind of cooperating church in Portland. So Portland would have been 5 hours. There's somewhere in Bend, there's all these kind of little house churches now. But back then, Ashland was the only church in Oregon that was part of our cooperating churches. Yeah. So we had to drive either 5 hours to Sacramento, which we didn't have a lot of connections to the Sacramento church at that time, but we had driven there a couple times just to hang out with other young people. And then, we would drive up to Seattle every once in a while and, just like try to soak up as much time. Me and my best friend would like come back. We're like crying. We're leaving because we're like, it's just the two of us out here. We're like so discouraged, like we really wanted to have a, exciting campus ministry to be part of. So it was really hard to just be the two of us. Wow. Especially that year before Chris came. Yeah. Because then it started to feel like, okay, we're actually gaining some momentum. Before it was like, you're just hanging on to Jesus,
Yes.
Well, Amy, I remember when you got met and you started coming out, and I was so thrilled. I know Pam was, of course, too, because I thought, this girl's amazing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just immediately thought, this girl, so talented. Yeah. So
bright.
So bright. Mm-hmm. I mean, just loaded with talent in so many different ways. And we were all thrilled, but you faced some really massive challenges as a young Christian. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think the first one came about like 3 days after I got baptized. Is that I went and studied abroad, and everyone was like, don't do it. It's going to be so hard spiritually, but I'm a stubborn person that has to learn from my mistakes. And so I did go study abroad, and there was a church I went to Toluca, Mexico. There was a church there, but it was really hard to get there. I had to take a taxi everywhere. So it was really hard to stay connected. There wasn't really a lot of young people in the church there either. So I really struggled spiritually. I pretty much at one point just stopped going to church altogether, and just kind of fell back into some of my own, worldly patterns. And so, but my best friend Sandra came and visited me over Christmas break, and I was doing terribly, and, kind of trying to play it off like I wasn't doing so terribly, but I was. But when I came back because I studied abroad for 4 months, when I came back, Sandra basically, she like kidnapped me and took me in midweek.
Yes. Yeah. That exactly. That's what happened. Mm-hmm.
I was like, she's like, hey, why don't you just come to midweek? Everyone wants to see you. And I was, feeling embarrassed because I wasn't being very spiritual at the time. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And she's like, no, just come. Everyone's so excited to see you. And I was like, okay. So then she, dragged me out. And I think at that point, like, once I was back in the fellowship, I kind of everything came flooding back to me. This is what I wanted. This is the life I wanted. This community is what I want to be part of. All these people are so genuine. And so I think I was that night, I was confessing all my sin. I was like, okay, this is where I'm at. I'm really struggling, not doing well. And, people were so graceful with me. I think that's something I really appreciate. It wasn't like everybody coming down on me like, you're in sin. It was like people were like, hey, we can figure this out. Let's pace ourselves. You don't need to figure everything out night one. And so I feel like the grace that I was given was really helpful to like, you know, not feeling like even worse about where I was at spiritually.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful. So that was, you know, one challenge as a young Christian. And then,
okay, you got baptized when did you get baptized?
August 23rd, 2006.
Okay. So you immediately went.
She went.
Yeah. It was like 3 days later. I was like going home and flying to Mexico.
We made it strong pitches, but yeah, like you said, nope, wasn't happening. So,
okay.
Yep. And then she was going to keep sharing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I was able to come back from that. You know, I think I like swore off guys. I was like, nope, not going to date. Don't even want to think about guys for like a year, because I had dated a non-Christian for a while. And I was like, nope, not even going to date, not even think about it. I mean, I look back and I'm like, you know, whatever. I did like a makeup fast. I was like, I don't want anyone to look at me. I don't want, you know, so I was like trying to do whatever I could to like, just be like, no, guys are not in the picture. And so, yeah. And then, you know, me and Chris started dating. But, you know, it's kind of woven into that. Chris briefly shared he was coming back from my dad's memorial. So, 2008 in February, my dad died. He actually committed suicide, which was really shocking and devastating to our family. You know, I think sometimes people think about suicide and think like somebody like looks like this super depressed person, or like it would seem really obvious that there's somebody who would do that. But with my dad, it wasn't that way. He really loved God, was a really good father. You know, 2008 was just a really bad economic time, and he was a small business owner. So he was just really struggling financially and just didn't feel like, you know, he had a way out. So, you know, that was just devastating. I mean, I remember it was actually Rob and Pam, you know, it was after church one Sunday, and Rob and Pam were like, hey, come over to our house. We really need to talk to you about something. I'm thinking, oh man, what'd I do? I screwed up. I'm like getting discipled on something, you know, they're going to lay me out. I did something wrong. And, you know, then to have my brother call me and say, Amy, you know, dad committed suicide. It was just devastating. Like, I just couldn't even wrap my brain around that. So, you know, it was so encouraging that Pam drove up with me and took me home to be with my family, that I'd have to be alone during that time. But it was like, the whole thing is our dating relationship kind of wrapped up. Like here, I'm like literally thinking, you know, I'm pretty sure we're going to start dating. You know, you can kind of like get a feel for like, you know, we like each other now. We're probably going to start dating. But, yeah, he was going to ask me to be his girlfriend like that Monday.
I had picked up all the stuff at a Michael's in Eugene, like all the stuff to ask her. And we literally, unbeknownst, crossed paths on I-5.
Yeah.
I was driving back from Seattle and she was driving up to Portland. We didn't even know it, but we crossed paths. That's how close it was.
So yeah, he was, you know, going to ask me, but then, you know, this happened. And so I was, you know, kind of calling him, trying to get a hold of him. His phone had died, wasn't able to get a hold of him. But you know, so then he didn't ask me right then, but he did come up and visit my family, which was really encouraging, because I think we were just all so devastated and heartbroken and just, I mean, we're just depressed, you know, it was just such a hard time for our family. And so for Chris to be able to come up and kind of be a bright spot and to be like a light in that really dark place was really helpful. And I think it did kind of fast forward our relationship a little bit, you know, because I'm going through something really intense. And then, you know, he was going to like wait to ask me to be his girlfriend. But then it was like, you know, you're practically dating already, so you just might as well date. So, but I think that really fast forwarded our relationship. It's like, this is like the worst thing I've ever went through in my life, you know, and he's having to kind of walk through it with me. So I was really grateful, you know, he was so, you know, kind and loving to my family and just really helped and served us during that time. And I think, you know, it just made me, you know, fall for him even more.
Right. So Amy,
yeah,
I remember when I got the call from your brother, it was after church. And I think you and Sandra and other girls had gone off to the mall or something, shopping in Medford. And your brother said, hey, you know, this is what happened. And we called you and you came over. I was like, oh, I just dreaded talking, you know, just I mean, we didn't tell you what happened, but we just handed the phone to you and your brother. But how do you? I mean, your dad was a spiritual person. He was a churchgoer. Your dad and your mom. I mean, they were like super active in their church, and like you said, and when you just said that, I forgot that was 2008. I mean, only now in retrospect I realized how big. I mean, that was the real estate recession. I mean, just a massive. I didn't realize it was connected financially. How did you just make sense of it? I mean, I know it just how do you deal with something like that from something so unexpected?
Right.
Yeah. I think, it was a lot of praying and crying, really. Like, I prayed and cried a lot. I journaled, had a lot of, friends involved and talked about it a lot. But I think one of the things that kept me encouraged, was our dating relationship. Like, at least there was one positive thing going on in my life. It was my senior year of college. So it was really stressful too. And my mom was really dead set on me going back and finishing rather than being with the family, which was really hard because, every time I would go back and be home with my family, I'm like, oh yeah, it just was different, And so, but, we had been doing campus ministry and we were studying the Bible with two girls, Danny Hart at the time and Kayla Bortolazzo.
Oh my gosh.
With them. So
wow.
I think honestly, Kayla was kind of getting to the, pinnacle of her studies. And I think just being able to even focus on something outside of what was going on because it was just so depressing was helpful to go okay, God's still working in people's lives, in spite of, all these challenges that I'm going through. God's still good. He's still working in people's lives. And I think that helped me to just see outside of my situation. I did end up going to counseling after a while when we were engaged, went to some counseling, and that was really helpful just to process the grief. Cause it was so hard to stop and really focus on it.
Right.
Because I was in my senior year, it was just busy. We were dating, we were engaged, so it was just a lot going on.
Yeah.
So I think the counseling really did help me stop and process the grief that I had, been experiencing and had a summer before, we got married to work on that a little bit. But, I really struggled, I was really close to my dad and, when I look at what my relationship, I'm so grateful for my relationship with my mom now, but back then I was way closer to my dad than I was with my mom. So I just kind of felt like the parent that I was closest to, was just gone and, just felt so abandoned. So I really struggled. I went on a mission trip and ended up having a big, major mental health crisis while I was there. I think the stress of everything just hit me all at once. I wasn't sleeping well. And had a big mental health crisis, had to go home, had to spend time with my family, which was actually really healing because I hadn't been able to spend a good amount of time with them since my dad had died, just to even process this is what life looks like as my family. Cause in my brain, it was still oh, mom and dad live here, even though obviously I knew he was gone, it was just, I hadn't had time to really process. This is our new normal.
Yeah.
My mom was living with my sister. So I went and spent time and stayed with my sister for a few weeks and went to counseling. And it was a really, really challenging time. I felt why, it's all those questions. Why is God allowing this to happen? Why is this, all those questions that you have. But I think, I really trust that my dad really loved God and knowing that God was gonna, he was in God's hands, regardless, I didn't have to worry about it or feel like I need to, figure out where he was or where he stood before God. I always really learned to entrust people's souls to God. It's not my job to try to figure out, I can't see in people's hearts. Only God can do that. And so I think really entrusted that to him and was really like felt at peace about that. So
thanks for sharing that. Wow. I mean, it's true. You've gone through, just, it's reminded me just how much you've overcome as a young woman. It's really impressive. And, going along with that, Amy, I mean, you're in the ministry, you're married, you have 3 children, you guys are leading a church in Spokane, Washington. And so maybe you could keep sharing a little bit about how have you managed to maintain your mental health, do the work of the ministry, and raise a family.
Yeah. So, I kind of mentioned kind of that first mental health crisis that I had in 2008. And then had several other ones like over the years.
Like when you say a mental health crisis, can you describe what you went through?
So it came like insomnia, anxiety. I can share what I got diagnosed with finally, but that wasn't until 2017. But yeah, I would get really bad insomnia. I would get so anxious that I couldn't sleep. And so I could go like a few days without like barely sleeping at all. And so it was just miserable, and felt, like anxious and depressed at the same time, and then not being able to like get rest to kind of recuperate. So yeah, that was like what it would be. It would be like insomnia, with really bad anxiety and just, mentally spiraling, just like negative thoughts, just couldn't get out of it. So yeah, struggled with that and didn't really know, went off and on to counseling, didn't really know like what it was. We just kind of thought maybe it's anxiety and depression. And then in 2017, I had a major episode and got diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It's bipolar disorder type 2, which tends more towards depression than like the mania. So that's why it was always kind of seen as anxiety depression, because you're more likely to have the lows than you are to like experience those, they call, manias or high episodes. So finally got diagnosed. And like, even though it was discouraging, because you're like, oh, I don't want to have a major mental health, like regardless of whether I had a diagnosis or not, I was experiencing those things. So in some ways it was a relief to go, okay, now I know what we're dealing with, so we can treat it. And so was able to get on some medications. There was I didn't have a great prescriber at the time. So, it was like trying to figure out and navigate with just a primary health care. And they should have referred me to somebody that knew what they were doing, but they didn't. And so, yeah, we just went through a lot of ups and downs of like trying to figure out what medications I need that would keep me like in a good place. So we did finally kind of find that balance, but I had to spend a few nights in a mental health hospital, which was like really humbling and scary and terrible, but I also like really needed that help. And so I was able to get, finally sit down with a psychiatrist, and then they were able to refer me to somebody outside to continue to prescribe, medication that I need. So, so that was 2017. That was really, really, challenging time. At that time, I had to step out of the ministry because I was like, I need to focus on my mental health. I can't kind of balance all of this with like this new diagnosis and trying to figure out this medication. I just was really struggling. So I had to step out of the ministry. 2017. And then, then I was able to get on a medication that was helpful. I had a counselor that had been kind of walking with me through this process and really helping me. And she was instrumental in just, helping me to get the help that I needed, and had kind of just been with me before and then afterwards. That was really like a really important piece to like finding stability, was the medication, and then having a mental health, counselor to help me like process like everything that I was going through. It was super scary. And so, I think, that's been 5 years. ever since I kind of figured out the medication piece, you know, there's always like little, when you have bipolar disorder, there can be like little dips of like, oh, I, you know, feel a little more down or a little more energetic, but have been able to really keep really stable since then, which I feel really blessed. And I pray about it regularly, like, you know, every day is a gift that I'm able to, you know, feel like myself and feel like I'm able to, you know, take care of my kids and take care of, you know, my husband and, you know, be able to be present and be able to, you know, be healthy in a way that I hadn't been able to be, because it was always just kind of like, you didn't know when those episodes would come. And then you just, everything would get just thrown into just chaos. Yeah.
So Amy, I've just got to ask, and I know I got your permission before the interview here, but can you share how your dad passed away?
Yeah. So he actually jumped off a bridge, which, you know, there was eyewitnesses that saw that happen. But I think that was you know, we never found, he jumped off a bridge and I think it fed into the Columbia River, which is a huge river. They never found his body. So I think that was a huge just piece, like a missing piece of the grief puzzle, if that makes sense, like to never kind of have that closure. You know, obviously I think it'd be traumatic to watch it happen, but I think there's a part of you that would process it better if there was a body or, you know, some sort of physical evidence, you know? And so I think that was like a big kind of missing piece that was really hard with all of us, you know, grieving to never have, you know.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, you were, okay, this was all happening during your dating, you know, pre-dating, dating, engagement. I mean, this is all massive crisis. Tell me what was going through your mind at the time? This is the summer of 2008, right?
February is when he passed.
Yeah, he passed in February. We started dating in March. We got engaged in May. I think throughout our entire relationship, there's been, you know, some sort of just life and trauma woven through, and we've become pretty good at navigating it.
Gosh.
It's not something you want to be good at.
We're hardy people. But I just remember, first of all, kind of going, where's God in this? This is not the fairy tale. This is not the narrative that I had written. And so there's a lot of kind of just searching for that for Amy and for me, where God was at. And then when she came back from that mission trip, we were already engaged. We were 3 or 4 weeks away from being married. And it was challenging. Like, what do we do? How do we move forward? And I remember getting lots of advice and counsel. I remember sitting on the hill just above SOU. And I think I called every evangelist, every elder. I mean, I could ask advice in the church, but there were only like 12 people.
And they'd probably give you 12 different answers.
Yeah, they were mostly college. Right. Like, I wasn't, you know, hey, how would you handle getting married during this crisis? And they're like, you know, so I just remember sitting on the hill and calling everybody I had on my phone, you know, and I think it was Scott Green who probably gave the best advice. He goes, if you have faith in God, God will open the paths and he'll close the paths. And if the path is open, you'll know. And so that's kind of what I committed to. And I think that's what we've committed to throughout the process of, you know, for Amy's mental health journey and just our life journey and the different challenges we faced is, you know, God's going to guide you through those paths, but you have to kind of let go. And I think that was where, you know, where I came to, you know, at that time, I had to just let go and trust God that, you know, our marriage is going to be healthy and dynamic and fulfilling and not worry about those things. But I had to really let go of my control and stop trying to write my story and let God do it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, you know, I think it's important for people to understand too, Chris, that you know, you didn't step out of the full-time ministry. You've been leading the church in Spokane during this whole time. And Amy, maybe you could also share, Amy, when exactly you went back into the full-time ministry. But I would like Chris to share what that was like and how you navigated that. That's amazing.
Well, I think what even got left out. I mean, there's going to be so many things left out. We could be here for a couple hours talking about all the twists and turns, but we were actually in Phoenix leading the campus ministry when another round of this happened. At the same time, we were being encouraged to take the job here in Spokane. And so we were negotiating, contracts and moving and all this kind of stuff. And Amy had, just kind of an episode there. And so then we were like, we took the job here and then we backed out of the job here and we were going to stay and do campus ministry there. And then we just decided to get out of the ministry altogether to figure this out. And that was in 2013. And so we moved back to Spokane.
Okay. So can you do me a favor here, Chris, for my sake and for the sake of the listeners, can you give a little bit of a rough timeline of, from the time you went to Ashland to different ministry spots you've been to? Just, can you give us an overview so we can kind of get a reference point?
I guess let me back up. I was converted in Spokane and moved to Ashland. We were in the ministry there together for about 3 years. Had our son, and 6 weeks later moved to Phoenix in 2010. He was 6 weeks old when we packed him in a car and went to lead the campus ministries in Phoenix, Arizona. And then we were there until about 2013 when this started kind of coming to fruition. And we moved back to Spokane in April 2013. And we were both out of the ministry. And I owned a house here, so that's why we moved back. My tenants had moved out. I had an empty house with nobody to pay rent. And so we moved back here, hoping to find work. And so that was kind of the ongoing challenge, was just navigating those things. And are we in ministry or out of ministry? And it wasn't long after we got back here that I went back into the ministry, and Amy stayed out. She was okay with me taking that job, but if I hadn't taken that job, I probably would have had to sell the house and move in with one of our parents or something. It was just not a great time and space to be looking for work. And so I went in the ministry, she stayed out, and then I can't even follow all the ins and outs that we had, but about a year or so later, you went in, and then 2017 happened, you went out, and then 2019, I think Amy came back in because we had some needs to meet. Or was it 2021? 2021, she came back in. And so it's just kind of been an ongoing process with that. I think for me, there's a couple of things that were difficult. One, I need to take care of my family. That's the first responsibility. Before paid ministry staff, I am a father and a husband. And then two is just kind of the stigma of, mental health and navigating that as a family. And so those were the challenges. And I think the thing that I learned through the process is we had to be advocates for ourselves and advocates for what God can do and not limit it to what people have experienced. Because, we have a lot of best practices, but that doesn't mean God can't work through new experiences. And so it's difficult to be leading on my own and try to navigate those things and bringing in, collectives of people to help with other aspects of ministry. But it taught us a lot about delegating and trusting people to be Christians and helping them to do so. But it wasn't always easy to do ministry alone. And in the context of how that works with our churches, it was new.
Amy, how did you deal with the stigma? I mean, there are people who wrestle with mental health, and yet you had such a high profile position in the church. I'm sure there's, everyone's looking at you, and you're wrestling with mental health issues. I mean, what were some of the challenges that you faced, and how did you navigate it?
Yeah, well, I think, as a general rule of thumb, people were pretty compassionate, I would say. I'd say, the majority compassionate. Hey, we're here for you guys. We love you guys. We support you guys. What do you need? I think, it was probably like maybe 6 months to a year that I was really not doing a lot at all with ministry, like maybe just a little bit here and there. Obviously I was going to church and, would help and serve how I could, but I wasn't really like doing a, women's ministry role for about 6 months to a year. But then as I got healthier, I was able to do a lot more. And we were able to, go back to pre-marriage counseling and helping, marriages and helping with Bible studies, and kind of stepped back into that role unpaid, which was great because it took off the pressure of like, you are expected to do these things. It was like, hey, I'm just doing these things because I love God, and people are just happy with what I'm able to do. So I think the real stigma came in when I wanted to go back on paid staff. I only wanted to work part-time for the church just because I wanted to make sure I maintained a healthy work-life balance with, knowing that mental health, like in stress, really can induce, mental health crisis. So I think I was like, yeah, I just want to work part-time because I was working as a nanny and doing church leading stuff. So I was like kind of feeling really stretched thin. I was like, okay, I'm working as a nanny, I'm trying to, it was like Chris said, when he was working his full-time job, here I am like having conversations with people. I'm like nannying and like having a D time with somebody on the phone. And I'm like, okay, I can't kind of keep doing all of these things well. And so I was like, I think, I've been stable on my medication, feel like I've got a good kind of treatment plan for like 4 years. And I'd like to step back into a paid role part-time. And, there were some people that were supportive, but then there was some real pushback on, it's just, it wasn't done in the past in our family of churches. Like if you had mental health, it's like, you're out of the ministry. You can't do it. And so I think, maybe there was pockets that were less like that, but a lot of the stories I've heard from the past were like, yeah, you had mental health. You're kind of like, nope, you're asked to step out. And so it wasn't done in the past. And I think especially, bipolar disorder has a lot of stigma because, I think even the media and places portray it, that all they show is the unmedicated people who they do. It's like, hey, let's watch this train wreck, and it's like, well, yeah, nobody wants to watch that. But I'm like, how about you just watch a really boring movie of someone who takes their pills every night and goes to their counseling session when they're supposed to? Like, that could be a really boring life, but everyone wants to watch the train wreck. So that's how it's portrayed, which I get really irritated when I see movies like that, because I'm like, we just like talk about, people that just do what they need to do to take care of themselves and are able to maintain stability, because it is possible. I mean, there's varying levels of severity with any mental health. But I think if you do what you need to do and stick to your treatment plan, you can really enjoy a pretty normal life in most cases. So I think, it was hard then to want to go and like, I'm good at ministry, not to,
you are
my own horn or
That's
whatever,
true.
but
you are.
I'm good at, this. I don't really feel super passionate about doing anything else, And so I was like, I don't want to like go start another career. I want to provide for my family, living on one income is hard. Especially one ministry income. So it was like, I kind of need to do something to help provide for my family. And so, we went to the board and was like, hey, I'm kind of already doing a lot. What do you think about maybe paying me for some of those things? So the challenging thing was nobody had a problem with what I was doing for free. But as soon as like a paycheck got attached, it was like, you can't do that. I'm like, but I'm already doing it. Wow. Nobody's paying me to do it, So that was, you're like, that's interesting. Nobody's told me no until I asked to maybe be supported to do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it would take less pressure off, because then I don't have to work another job outside of the ministry.
Right.
But yeah, it was, a battle. I don't know if I should share this, but we can always delete it. But, I actually got asked by the board to disclose by one member on the board to disclose my entire mental health history, which is an extreme violation of your privacy. You're not allowed to do that in, the US. You're not allowed to do that. Right. You're not allowed to ask somebody to disclose their entire mental health history. So that was like one thing that was like, I just felt so kind of violated and like, wow, like that's really private. And I am actually very open. I talk about my mental health from the pulpit. I really feel passionate about helping people with their mental health and people really feeling like they can live fulfilled lives, even if they struggle with mental health. Because I think people just, can push aside it like, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that because of mental health. And I'm like, well, if you do what you can to take care of yourself, you can really, do a lot.
Right.
Yeah, you might not be able to do everything, but you can really still do a lot and really accomplish a lot for God. So I feel very passionate about helping people. So I talk about it pretty frequently from the pulpit. So, it kind of felt like that was thrown back in my face. Like, here I have been vulnerable rather than hiding this and not telling people about my mental health. I've been very open and vocal about it, getting help when I need to. Then to kind of feel like that was thrown back in my face, like, you need to disclose all the nitty gritty details of your mental health with, a board of people that are going to decide. I'm like, nobody in their right mind would disclose all the negative things about themselves.
Right.
No.
Exactly.
No, that's not going to happen.
Exactly.
It's one of those, I think it's one of those crossroads where church and, business kind of meet and it gets weird. And I think, I remember waiting for special missions contribution to come in to know if I was going to still have a job when we were in Ashland together, right? Like, I'm just sitting there going, am I going to have to go get the second job? Like, what's happening here? Just praying in the pew as, people in the back counting. And it's one of those really uncomfortable crossroads of, I think, just living life and having finances and the church. And it's something that until you're in the ministry and your paycheck is on the livelihoods of other people's faith, is really difficult. And I think that's where, we had to be advocates for ourselves and be an advocate for Amy, that we can do this. It may look different. And it shouldn't come at a cost of, personal embarrassment or sacrifice. Like, we can have faith. And, it wasn't necessarily like we want a handout not to do the job, but, we have to have these discussions. And I think they're uncomfortable discussions because we just don't understand. And so I think it was really healthy for us to go through that, and just to kind of prevail through that, have faithfulness prevail. Like, let's trust God.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's set some parameters to help, and let's just trust God in this. And I think that was a great resolve, and I really appreciate how it kind of came to fruition. Those unfortunate conversations, I think, just helped us. Like, I think Amy is a great advocate, and she talks to lots of people, especially women in ministry who are, going through stuff or feeling stuff, and they don't know how to navigate the lifestyle of it, the business. Like, it's not a career. We try not to think of it as a career and like a financial thing, but it's how we keep the lights on and put food on the table.
Right.
So it gets really emotionally tied there.
Right. You have 3 kids.
And if we hadn't discussed that, if we hadn't gone through that, I don't think she would have been as prepared as she's been to help people. And I think it leads to a healthier place. I think that it's helped the church and helped us too.
That's awesome.
Well, Amy, one question I have is, help me out with this. Like, when I think back just from knowing that was such a catastrophic, just such an incredible loss to lose your dad in such a horrifying way. Do you think that that's what triggered your mental health, or help me out here? Was this something that was ongoing prior to this, or when you look back, where do you see it as the origin of your mental health issues?
Yeah, I mean, many mental health issues are kind of triggered by a traumatic event. So I would say it was probably triggered by that, but I know also mental health can, have a lot of genetic, components to it. So it could be like, oh, I have a genetic predisposition towards this, and then because of the trauma, it's like triggered, if that makes sense. So I mean, I've thought like, gosh, if he didn't do that, would I have had, this issue? And, that's just one of those like rabbit holes you just don't need to go down. Like, that's just what ifs. But I think for sure the stress, and I think the timing of it, just because I was only 22, your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25. I think I was at like a really vulnerable time of even just like still technically having like an adolescent brain, that is even more traumatic to kind of have that sort of traumatic event to happen during that time.
Wow.
Okay, well, let's just change the channel. I mean, that's heavy stuff.
That is
inspiring.
Wow. Thank
at the
you
same
for sharing
time.
that.
I know. Thank you so much.
Yes. It's going to help a lot of people.
Oh my gosh. I can't imagine. So let's go back a little bit and switch the channel to ministry. Chris, you walked onto a campus of only 5,000 students and you turned that place upside down. I mean, when you were leaving, people were getting baptized right and left. I mean, people you I mean, I think about like Brad Tomashiro, people like you started converting tons of wrestlers, tons of football players. I mean, it was just exciting. I mean, you left an amazing campus ministry that really provided so much future ministers. I mean, Brad's leading the church in Hilo along with Gary Roberson, and so many people have done amazing things. Danny Brown is down here. You mentioned her. Kayla went overseas to China. How'd you do it? I'm a small church situation. It was. Can you just kind of give a little flashback of what you did walking onto that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a major flashback. I'm like taken back to lots of memories when you talk about how small the campus was. I literally remember having to basically sit in a coffee shop while everybody was in class because there's nobody else out and walking around. Like, everybody was literally in class. And so I would just sit in the coffee shop and wait for classes to get out. And then I go share my faith and I go back to the coffee shop. So I forgot how small it was, right? And you kind of knew everybody. I think one of the things that in hindsight now I can look back and discover was I don't think the size of any space makes any difference. There's people who need to know about Jesus. And I led that campus ministry, and then I went on to lead at ASU, which is like 70,000. And everywhere you go, there's open people. There's people seeking. They may not understand why they're seeking or how at the moment, but it didn't really matter. And so I think just being present in every place, I just put myself places. And so I just made it a point. I'm going to go to campus every day. I'm not going to stay at home. You know, if people are on campus, I'm on campus. And so, you know, Amy and Sandra would sneak me into the dorms, and I just hang out and watch football in the dorms and order pizza. And whatever guy walked by, I'd say, hey, why don't you have a seat? We're going to watch this game. Or so I think just injecting myself into the campus life, even though I didn't belong there. I worked at Starbucks part-time.
Yeah.
We didn't get to that part of the story, but when Amy and I got married, she didn't want to live in the church building. I think
oh, yeah.
she had no desire to walk to the YMCA.
Yeah. That was a healthy boundary. Yes.
I will not marry the church building.
So that's how I got a job at Starbucks, so that we could actually have an apartment and not live in the church building. But yeah, I got the job at the Starbucks right next to campus. So college students came in, you know, local people came in. I just interjected myself. And I think even with the youth and families, like going to, you know, your guys' kids' games, you know, James's games, Ann's performance, David's games, like I just resolved to be in the space where people were at. And I think that's what ministry is. That's what Jesus did. I'd love to say that was my mindset then. I just didn't want to be alone, probably. That's why I was everywhere, you know, hanging out, is I just didn't want to be alone in my apartment or alone in that creepy church building. So, you know, it motivated me to get out. But I think if we just put ourselves in the space where people are, God will show us what's happening. And that's what we did. And the campus ministry just kind of slowly grew, and it was just person by person. And we didn't go out there trying to, we couldn't go out there and say we're going to share with 1,000 people. That would literally be half the campus. We just went out to be a part of the campus. And I remember one point we were growing, persecution was starting to come, and we were actually studying with, I can't remember the roles. One of them was the head of the housing, like the director of housing, and her husband was like the director of something else on campus, like prominent people. We were studying the Bible. You guys remember they were coming out of the church, and we studied the Bible with them. And then they decided they didn't want to be a part of our church anymore. We're like, okay. But persecution started to rise, and people were trying to get us kicked off campus. And I remember seeing the woman and her boss on campus. I said, hey, this is happening. What could you tell us? Like, what can we do about this? They're not true accusations. And the guy who ran the entire, he was like, he might've been the dean, just looked at me and goes, we know what your group's doing to this campus. We want you here. We appreciate the value you're adding, because you are not just pulling people away. You are part of this community, and we will defend you to the end. And I was like, wow,
wow.
That was probably the biggest vote of like confidence that, you know, because this woman had come to church and she had decided not to be a part of our church, and was still like, no, you guys are spreading the gospel. And so I think it wasn't just about going out and, you know, grabbing as many people as we could. It was really being a part of the community, really being in the presence of, we were part of SOU. We were part of Ashland. We were part of Ashland High School. We're part of the sports. And I think that's what made us really effective. And that's where people were attracted to. Yeah. And that's when you started seeing Brad and the little Toyota pickup truck with large Samoan dudes in the back, named Big Mike, you know, showing up to church, you know, and
it's true.
It built that family that really brought people out.
Okay. So Okay. When were you appointed as an evangelist, Chris? I can't remember.
I was.
What was that conference?
It was at the
It was
conference.
the conference in Tacoma, Washington. Amy was pregnant with
So it was
Aiden. It was
2010.
July or August 2010.
Okay, so I appointed you as an evangelist, which really surprised people because we were such a small church, and yet people. I don't think people realized what a conducive environment it is to have a small church to raise up leaders. And I mean, there was a lot of people. It blows my mind how many great people are converted in that little tiny church. I mean, you and Sandra getting baptized. I mean, you guys became so influential and church leaders. I mean, just like it's amazing. But when you look back, Chris, what helped you? I mean, Pam and I were training you guys at the time. What was it that helped you to become an evangelist relatively quickly? Okay, what were we doing that when you look back, you go, that really helped me to grow?
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking this question because I think it's something that's big on my heart right now in our fellowship and our movement of churches is you guys gave me space to go make disciples and to make mistakes and to have responsibility. I wasn't just checking things off a to-do list or, I didn't feel like an intern who was running errands for you guys or, just working under you. Like I was given a piece of the pie. I was given a responsibility. And I think that helped me to grow exponentially. I know a lot of guys who went into ministry. Yeah, there's ownership to the church. Yeah. And a lot of guys who went into ministry at the same time, most of which became evangelists, but took 3 or 4 more years because they just didn't have the opportunities that I had. It was unique that I got to preach so regularly. I really refined my preaching skills. I remember showing up when I first moved down there and I showed up to Pam, you were out of town and I showed up to the house on Old Willow Lane there where you guys lived and Rob was on his way out and he said, "Hey, glad you're here. I think there's leftovers in the fridge. We'll be back later tonight." Rob was going to his mom's house for dinner. And I just remember, basically, you said the campus is just up the road. You should go check it out. And that was kind of the mindset I had.
Okay. Wait a second. Hold on a second. Was this the time that what was I wearing at that time?
You were fully clothed at that time.
Okay.
That was years later when we were much closer, where I dropped David off to teen camp where the great white hype came. But you said something. You said the campus is just up the road. You should go check it out. This was when I came for like that 1 month internship. Yeah. And I just went, that's the mentality I appreciated was you said, there's the campus, go make disciples. And I remember we'd check in and have a lunch every Tuesday and it turned into a dinner with your family every Tuesday night. But I would go do ministry and I'd come back and I would check in with you. And it was much like what Jesus did with the disciples. Like he'd send them out and then they'd come back and report and they get excited about something. He goes, "That's great, but focus on this." And that's what I did. And I think what made it so effective was I had ownership. I got to do stuff that I wouldn't have got to do if I was in a bigger church. And you pointed me to a mission field and said, "Go make disciples." And it was kind of a sink or swim. It's kind of that dad technique, just throw the kid in the pool and tell him to swim to the edge. And that helped because I had to live more by faith and not by you holding my hand. And I think that was great. It was like a safety net instead of training wheels. And I think that's so imperative. And I've tried to model that with the interns that we've had or young ministers we've had. I'm like, there's the campus, go make disciples. I'll check in with you on Tuesday. We'll have lunch, right? And because that's got to be something where we build that personal conviction that it's my ministry, and to give space and opportunity to be used by God was just so important.
That's great. That's
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do that you were super initiative, self-motivated, and talented. I remember you coming up with ideas to reach out. I remember when you reached out to Elise Richter and you just came up with the idea, I'm going to go out before Thanksgiving or Halloween, and you're giving out candy bars in the library. And I think you handed one to Elise.
Reverse trick-or-treating is what I called it. I just went and knocked on study rooms and said, "Trick-or-treat," and then threw candy in. And if somebody asked why, I knew God wanted me to share my faith with them. If they didn't ask why, I just left and they got a piece of candy. So and I think 2 or 3 people asked why I was doing it. And one was Elise, and she ended up coming out to church and get baptized.
Oh, that's it inspired me. I didn't tell you to do that. I mean, that was totally on your own mind, your own dime. And you were on such a tight budget, Chris, but you just made it happen, and it inspired people, and people became Christians. That was like an early preview of servant evangelism there, doing that. Okay. So let's go back to you, Amy. And Pam wants to ask you a question.
Sure. Yeah. Amy, I want you to share about your family, your kids, how old they are. But I know with your last pregnancy, you had some serious difficulties, and you nearly died delivering your last child. So could you share about that?
Chris gets all the fun stories. I get all the trauma.
That's true.
I guess that's just my life.
Yeah.
So I have 3 kids. We have 3 kids together. Aiden is 11 and he'll be 12 in October. And then Avery, my daughter, is 8, and Adeline is just turned 1. And we actually are embarking on homeschooling this year. So that's a whole nother thing, but that's been fun so far.
My heart skipped a beat when you said, and we're.
Oh, no.
I was like,
I know.
What?
I know.
You're
Me
not.
too. I'm like,
No.
whoa, are we making an announcement on this podcast? I was like,
whoa,
whoa.
what is happening? And there's a long pause.
I know. I thought the same thing. I'm like, this is exciting. Wow. Keep it going.
No, I would faint.
No.
It would just be, continue your story.
Yeah, I almost died last time. I don't want to complete the task this time.
Yeah.
So we're done having kids. But yeah, so I got diagnosed with preeclampsia around, I think it was 30 or 33 weeks. I can't remember, which is basically dangerously high blood pressure. If anybody doesn't know what that is. So you can have seizures, all sorts of stuff, but they were just monitoring it. But because of that, I had to be induced to deliver early so that they could, take care of it before my blood pressure got worse, because it just increasingly would get higher and higher kind of each week. So was all set to, minus being induced, have a natural birth. I'd had natural births before with my other kids, and did that all the way up to the end. They broke my water and I had a lot of fluid, and I guess her head was never fully engaged. And so she got flipped around in there. And and so basically what was happening, I think it's called placenta previa, that the placenta, she was holding onto the umbilical cord. So if that detaches, before, your placenta is supposed to detach naturally, otherwise you can have hemorrhaging and all sorts of things. So basically the doctor's in a matter of seconds after bursting my water, and I'm thinking I'm gonna, deliver this baby, I'm sorry, we have to rush you to C-section. I have to call this immediately. And so it's just kind of panic. And then they're rushing me off, without even really saying much to Chris or my mom, who were there, just rushed me off to deliver the baby. And then, mask goes on. And I mean, literally, I'm terrified. The last thing I remember thinking is God, please don't let me die. My other kid, my kids need me. Obviously, I feel bad, not saying that Chris needs me, but I'm he'll be fine. I'm really thinking oh my gosh, especially even just the way I lost my dad, you don't want, your kids to experience losing a parent, that young, so traumatic. So I was God, please don't take me. And then, out, black. So apparently I did lose a lot of blood during that. My daughter, Adeline, was not breathing when she was born. So they had to, I don't know if they, put a mask on her, whatever, got her breathing, but she wasn't breathing. And then I did, lose a lot of blood, but made it out alive. It wasn't until later that we realized how much blood I had lost. And I was basically running around the hospital. My daughter was in NICU because she had jaundice really bad. And so I was running around trying to, bond and nurse and all these different things. And apparently I had no blood in my body. They realized that I needed 2 units of blood a few days after. I don't know how many days. It was a couple days after.
You received 2.
2
In
units
hindsight,
of blood.
they said you probably could have taken 3 units.
Yeah.
That's
so,
how.
Yeah. So I had like very little blood.
How much is a unit? Like what a unit?
Like a pint, like a full bag.
Okay.
Wow.
So I mean, the nurses and so the nurse was kind of like, I think you might need blood. She said that on like the day after.
I was like really pale.
And it wasn't until the resident came down and reviewed all the files and rushed a transfusion. He was very, very concerned with how low how little blood she was operating on. And so they basically said that she was running on adrenaline, just pure mom adrenaline. And her body was working like triple time. Just
oh my gosh! How much blood?
Her and Adeline were on different floors, and so it was just this constant back and forth. So
yeah,
that was the second time she almost died. The fact she had no blood in her system.
Yeah, and then I ended up getting discharged. Everything looked good after the transfusion. I had to stay a couple more days. I was still visiting Addie, but they were able to put us in kind of a mommy and me unit, but I wasn't the patient anymore. I was just there kind of able to take care of her. And then nurses would check on her to make sure she was getting the light therapy she needed for jaundice. But anyways, my leg swole up. One of my legs swole up really big. And so I was worried I had a blood clot because one was bigger than the other. So I went back over to the, maternal unit to get that checked out. And it wasn't that, but when they, they're like, oh no, you're good on blood clots, but actually your blood pressure is really scary high again. And we need to admit you immediately and get you on blood pressure medication. So, I feel like it was God, that I would have never thought like my blood pressure. I'm like, hey, that's, postpartum preeclampsia is very, very rare. Like preeclampsia, pretty rare. Postpartum is like very rare. So I didn't even think like, oh, I should probably keep an eye on my blood pressure. And nobody told me to keep checking it. So they rushed me in and started giving me medication. But yeah, that's, I just feel like by the grace of God, that was caught, because you can have seizures. You can have like severe brain stroke, brain damage, like all sorts of things from having, that high blood pressure. So by the grace of God, I was readmitted and on blood pressure medication and was able to, keep bonding with Adeline. And then, eventually by the time we got out of the hospital, we had been there for 8 days, thinking we had told our kids, we'll see you tomorrow with the baby.
Oh my gosh.
They're kind of terrified. They're sad about, their baby sister being admitted. And then we had to call them and be like, now mommy is really sick. And, my son shares later that he was really scared that, I wasn't healthy. And
that's in part because, we're not just like, hey, let's start a second family. This huge gap between our second child and our third. We had a late term miscarriage that the kids were at that point. We were supposed to find out if they were having a brother or sister, and they found out that the baby had died at like 15 or 16 weeks, 18 weeks. And so they'd already gone through that trauma once. And so now mom goes in the hospital and doesn't come back. Baby sister's in the hospital and isn't coming back. And so they've been through it too, we were in 9 different rooms on 4 different floors. Like I know parts of that hospital that I never knew existed. And people probably don't know existed. I saw it. I've seen it all. Just wandering around through the nights, but it was very much, just a constant time of faith and challenge. And it was during COVID, so nobody else was allowed to come visit us. Her mom left the next morning and never got to come back. And luckily, a few disciples worked there, and there was a little bit of respite for me to get to meet people and have some sharing. But otherwise, we were locked in the hospital and couldn't really do much.
Yeah, we spent our anniversary in a room, and Chris joked it was like you had a view of the city. He's like, "Hey, honey, I got you a
$1 million view for our anniversary."
Oh my gosh!
We kept our humor. I think that's another thing we do through all of our trauma. We keep our humor. We laugh.
That's right.
Even in the midst of the trials, we like to laugh. And
so, Chris, let's go ahead and turn our attention to you. You've really been going after study and teaching. Can you explain what and exactly why? I mean, you've really dug into it.
Yeah, I think when I was referencing earlier about going into the ministry, there was a drive that was fueled by kind of like what my passions were and what I saw the needs were. And so that's what led me into pursuing being an evangelist and going into the ministry that way. And I just kind of felt like as I'm, looking at the landscape of our, family of churches and my church. And one of the things I just kept noticing was people have been Christians for 20, 25, 30 years, just walking away from the faith. Sometimes disenchanted, sometimes disillusioned, but oftentimes they just didn't have answers to some deeper theological questions. And then they turn to the world or they turn to other teaching sources, and then they're being guided away and lured away from the fellowship. And so it just kind of marked something in me that said, there's a need here. And, I think going back to being an intern, Rob gave me a lot of books to read. Every year I had to read a long list of books, and I just became an avid reader. And I just felt like I could really digest stuff very quickly and then reverbalize it. And I'm not too swayed by differing opinions, left or right, or conservative or progressive. And I could just kind of see kind of a line through the middle, and just felt like it was really guiding me. So about 4 years ago now, I entered a program. I got a master's in religious education from Rochester University with a cohort of other ICOC ministers. It was a great time, really bonding time. I think it was unfair for the other professors that we had because I had John Oakes in my cohort. So it always felt like we were playing 2-on-1 or 3-on-1 against them. But so that was a great time. Then I felt like I want to continue to pursue it. So now I'm on a track to someday maybe get a PhD. Right now I'm in a master's of theology, which is kind of a next step in academia. And so, yeah, I've got aspirations to teach more in the Northwest. I've been doing teaching workshops in the churches here and for the ministers throughout the Northwest family of churches. Taught at the Teachers Conference a couple times. And my long-term goal is to find a way to branch into academia, teach collegiately for a couple of reasons. One, I want to bring the ICOC story and teaching into academia, but also just to financially free up the church. If I can make some money teaching in academia, that frees up funds that we can hire more young ministers. And so it gives me kind of a transitional, tent maker type thing that makes me a lot more flexible. So that's what's driving me. I just feel like there's a huge need. I feel like I'm able to handle the load and want to be able to share that with our family of churches.
Wow.
Such
That's
a big
awesome.
issue. I mean, I've noticed that too. I've noticed older disciples, friends walking away. And, I was just reading the scripture this morning where it said, hey, your salvation is closer than it was at the beginning. And it just, makes you really go, hey, I've got to, sharpen up here, but there's so much going against you. I mean, there's just a ton. What have you learned anything that could help a disciple that's been around 10, 20, 30, 40 years?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is to learn that God is expansive. Like, we don't come to a full understanding of God. You can't control Scripture. You can't control God. We're on a quest of discovery. I think sometimes we forget that. We get baptized when we feel like we've reached the culmination. And we forget that baptism is kind of like your wedding day. There's a long time of discovery. You discover more about your spouse as the years go on. And I think we stop learning about God and stop learning about ourselves and in the presence of God. And sometimes we can oversimplify scriptures down to just one practical, and then it loses its depth and meaning. And so I think for the Christian who's kind of going through that, I would say that there's more to God than you already know, and there's more to your relationship with God than you already know. And the other thing I'd urge people to do is just slow down. There's so much information. There's so many resources being thrown out there. And it's frustrating because a lot of it's just marketed garbage. It's just consumeristic. Like, you have people producing 3 or 4 books a year and podcasts and everything else. And it's just consumerism. And if we just slow down and attune ourselves to the scriptures and study and really just let ourselves be in a relationship with God, I think it helps us to grow. And that's just challenging because we want answers now. And if we've oversimplified scripture or we oversimplified our relationship, then we want some resolution to that. But my biggest encouragement is just patience and slowing down and really discovering what God might be leading you into from where you're at.
That's awesome. I recently read a book, actually a series of books by a guy named Nicholas Taleb, and he wrote the book called The Black Swan. And in it, he talks a lot about how we have such a bias towards what things that are new, books that are new. And we forget that if a book is older, if it's 500, 1,000 years, or like the Bible, a couple thousand years old, it shows that it's stood the test of time. I mean, it has incredible exponential value. And he just said, you really have to go back toward the older books and dig into them. And I think about, I've got a short list of books that I go to over and over again. In fact, a book that I keep reading and I've literally worn out the cover of multiple copies is The Imitation of Christ. I mean, I read it this morning, and I was just like, I read one sentence and I was convicted, just instant conviction, like, oh my gosh, I got to shape up. It just was really heart level convicting.
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying there. Has there been anything you've read recently, old or new, that has helped you, has inspired you, moved you? Anything that you'd recommend? You go, hey, this is a really good book to read.
That's a loaded question.
I know. It's not a test.
Put it in the comments section.
Sure.
I've just been reading. I read about 5 books a month, so I'm usually in a few at the same time. But I don't have anything off the top of my head, but I think I would agree. Balancing out new with old, and I try to balance that out. I'll read something that's newer, but then I try to read something that's at least 50 to 100 years or more old, because it does stand the test of time. And I think it also displays the work of the Spirit through time, of what's constantly being said through Christian experience. So if you're reading something that was written 2,000 years ago and 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, and it's constant, then the Holy Spirit's probably working through that. But I don't. It's hard to say which books have really stood out to me right now.
We'll put it in the notes.
Yeah, if I can think of anything.
So, there's been, thinking about your guys' life, there's been a lot of challenges, a lot of testing. God has really been working in your life in a powerful way, but it hasn't all been challenging. You recently acquired a building. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's beautiful. I got to see it.
You did?
Yeah, I did. I was up in Spokane. I got the tour.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. You'll have to go.
Yeah, we'll have to bring you up. So we've kind of been wandering for the 20 years. The church here just celebrated their 20th anniversary. I came back in 2013 to help lead the church. And so we've just kind of bounced around from building to building. We've been in 5 different locations until now. Kind of the traditional way of going about it. We've had some nice opportunities where people have rented us spaces that worked really well. But through that time, we're just really frugal. I felt like my conviction is to spend when I really feel like there's something to spend on, and then to hold back when there's not. So we've just always been in the black. We have a very generous church, consistent giving church. And so that frugality and kind of spending where we see God working, and then holding back and not just spending for the sake of spending, put us in a great position. We had, quite a bit of money saved up, and we had a donor offer to match what we need for a building. So we spent 5 years looking at buildings, at land, at everything. We had 6 different real estate agents just out there looking for us. I spent one day in an office going through 47 commercial properties and ranking them on a scale of yes, maybe, and no for like 2 hours with a real estate agent. And finally, I think God just kind of found the spot, or waited for the spot. And so we now have 9 acres on what's called Qualchan Creek, and it goes right through downtown. So we're 3 miles from the downtown corridor, like direct downtown. We're 3 miles away, but you would never know it. We're surrounded by trees and a creek, and we have moose walking through and beavers walking through, and wildlife's one of our biggest challenges right now. And it's been great. We got it for almost half the asking price, and paid cash, and the church is falling in love with it. I think it's been a great experience. One of the things that really compelled me to buy a church building was we've got a lot of people whose gifts and talents weren't necessarily being used to their fullness. There's a lot of hardworking people who like to work with their hands and feel like they're contributing. And since we bought this place, I mean, people come literally out of the woodwork to do woodwork. In back-to-back weekends, handrails got replaced on our main building. And now our beautiful stained wood, like redwood and mahogany. And I mean, it's incredible. Like, people are just outdoing each other and giving. It reminds me of a lot when they were building the tabernacle in Exodus, and we had to tell people, okay, slow down.
Right. Right.
So everybody's just all hands on deck, and we've seen a great attendance increase from people just coming from the website or seeing our sign on the highway and just pulling in. And even the old church website from the church we bought it from, still on there. They'll come to see that church and end up coming to our church. So it's been a great experience, and it's such a peaceful place that we hope to really use just for God's glory and to gather and to meet.
In the face, I mean, in the face of the challenges that you guys have faced, I mean, obviously, like, there's been suicide, there's been mental health challenges, there's been, all sorts of difficulties. How do you keep your eyes on God and keep in view a good God and keep a positive, faithful mindset rather than, I've seen a number of people just become very bitter, and that's certainly not you guys. You guys are some of the most, I mean, if there's a couple that I want to go to just to have a laugh and just have an encouraging, fun time, it's definitely you guys. I mean, we love spending time with you guys for sure. How do you keep that faithful mindset?
I think for me, it's just hope. I mean, scripture just talks so richly about hope and how it doesn't disappoint us. And I think it's just so important when you're in the midst of hard times to maintain hope that God still has good things in store for you, even if that's not what you're currently going through. The hope that good days are around the corner. I think, trials come and they, it's like scripture talks about, you're being thrown into I was just reading that in my quiet time the other day, the gold being refined, you got to get rid of the impure stuff that is in all of us, and that trials really do refine. And so I think, but just maintaining hope, I think in the midst of some of my mental health challenges, I'm like, I've always gotten better, even though it's really bad right now. It's never stayed this way forever. It's always improved. It just takes time. And so I think just maintaining that hope and trying to, really force yourself to retrain your brain to think positively and hopeful.
Yeah, that's great.
When you asked that question, I immediately went to Peter's response to Jesus when he turns around after everybody leaves. He goes, "Do you guys want to leave too?" And Peter responds, "Where would we go? We know you are the Messiah. We know you are the Son of God." And that's just kind of where I go. I have a very active imagination. Like, I get lost up in my head. I joke with my church. There's lots of voices up there. They're all saying a lot of different things. When I'm preaching the sermon out my mouth, but there's a whole nother sermon going on in my head. So that active imagination, I kind of play out scenarios. Like, what would it look like if I walked away? What would it look like? I try to project what would happen in my life based on the things you learn in studying the Bible with people who are immersed in the world. You see what the world does to people. You see what life is like without God. And you start just to apply those things. And at the end of the day, I just go, man, where would I go? I have found the living God. And I think that's what keeps you faithful. There isn't anything better. And to go through these challenges, Amy would still have health challenges. We all have health challenges. People pass away. Hardships come, financial hardships come. Do you want to do this with God or without God?
Right.
And I think that's the question where I go, absolutely. I want to do it with the living God and creator, not on my own or relying on purely human effort.
Right. That's great. All right. So with all those voices in your head, I need to ask, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are those voices telling you?
God, that's
we joked that we might have completely different where we want to be.
Of course. Well, that's to be expected. That's why you each have to share.
Just write it on a whiteboard, and then all of a sudden show it at the same time.
There you go. That'd be fun. Yeah, I want to hear.
It turned into a pre-marriage or marriage counseling. And, Amy's vision I can share would be in this home, raising our kids in the Spokane Christian Church until the day we die. She's got a plot ready out back for it. But I think in 5 years I'll have graduated with this MTH degree and be kind of plotting my course to a PhD. That's where I see myself in 5 years. And I think sticking with the church. I think this is a great space and there's a great need to work in the Northwest, especially in that teaching role. And so kind of making this a home base for a teaching ministry. I've got the nonprofit set up for the Northwest Academy of Ministry and Missions. And so launching that and kind of making this home base for that's kind of where I see it. And it's scary to say, Pam, because 5 years from now, our son will be preparing to graduate high school.
Wow.
So I'm going to not think too much further on that. I just kind of hold back, but I don't know what your ideas are.
The U of A, man, come on down.
We'll trade you one of yours for one of ours.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think just, as a mom, I think my hope is to see my kids really grow in their interest for, hopefully becoming Christians themselves, or at least being interested and involved in our church. And I think just on that note, I think one of the things we've really been investing in our church is really the youth ministry. We really know that it's something that encourages, obviously parents want their kids to become Christian. Nothing either greater encourages them or discourages them if they don't, make it or don't make that decision at that point. So, I really want to see our church have a thriving youth and family ministry where kids want to become Christians and that it's attractive. So I think that's kind of more of a church goal. But yeah, I think personally as a mom, I really want to see my kids really active in our youth ministry, really love God, really love the church, and be hopefully on their way to wanting to pursue a relationship with God.
That's great. A lot to look forward to.
Amy, what advice would you give to a person who has faced trauma? They've faced difficulties. They've faced maybe mental health challenges and still wants to make this life count. What advice would you give to them?
I think, I think just not giving up hope. I've, taught different lessons on mental health and, what do you do? And I think a lot of times people will discourage people from pursuing their dreams. Like, oh, you can't do that because you have this mental health thing or that mental health thing. But, even if your dreams have to shift a little bit, that you don't stop dreaming and having vision for your life of like, what could this look like? Maybe the vision that you had for your life is different now with having a mental health struggle, but how do you think God could use that? And how do you think God can continue to use you? Because I think it's just so important. That hope is so important. If you feel like, oh, I have nothing, oh, my dreams are dashed. Well, now it's time to come up with new dreams of what your future could look like, because it doesn't have to, I guess it doesn't have to ruin your life. That sounds dramatic, but a lot of people feel like, oh, my life's over. I have this major mental health thing. What am I I can't do these things I wanted to do, but what can you do? And just really having vision and dreams for your life, and, trying to block out some of the negative, like to find those positive people that are going to encourage you in those dreams and really build you up and lift you up and help you achieve those things. And just honestly to kind of not listen to the negativity, like you can't do that because of this, that, or the other, but to really find positive people that are going to encourage you to keep fighting to dream and have vision for your life.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Chris, what advice would you give to a person who wants to make this life count?
I think just explore what God's calling you into. I think sometimes we try to write our fairy tale or write our story, and God's the author, God's the creator. And I would have never imagined my story going the way it has. It's had lots of highs and lots of lows. But the more I'm learning to discover what God's calling me into, it's not always easy. Nobody in Scripture seems to have the perfectly easy time. We follow a crucified Messiah and Savior. So, but that's the better story. And I think our lives mean more when they have that level of sacrifice and devotion and and surrender to what God's leading us into. And I tend to feel like I'm on the path and in the work with God when the future seems scary and uncertain, but I still feel confident. That's how I felt going to Ashland, quitting my job and living in a church building. That's how I feel now, pushing into academia and wading through crazy theology and good theology and trying to help the church. And there's an uncertain future that I'm working through confidently because I feel like God's with me in it. And I think that's how you know you're living that life, is when you're kind of in that tension point of certainty and uncertainty. That's where you have to live by faith.
That's great.
It's been so good to talk to you guys. I love just being with you guys. You guys are some of our very closest friends, and we're so proud. I know that sounds funny, but we're so proud of you and your growth and what you're doing for God, and inspired by all that you've overcome and are faithful and leading the way. And I know our son James is up there visiting because you studied the Bible with James and baptized him, which is so awesome. And you are our teen minister. And now James is spending time with your son, it's an awesome.
He's actually literally babysitting our 1-year-old right now.
Of course he is.
Thank you, James.
Yeah. And of course,
watcher.
You didn't mention that, our only daughter, Anne, got married in December, and she wanted you guys to do, her and Felipe wanted you guys to do their pre-marriage counseling, and you came and you were the minister that married them. I mean, how special is that? Rob marries you guys. James is part of your wedding. And
did you study the Bible with Anne back in the day?
I did character studies with her. She was too young when I was there.
Okay.
But do you remember Anne jumped in when Amy became a Christian? Don't you remember Anne had to be in the water too?
She was like, "Can I be in the water when she gets baptized?"
I think the answer was no, and she just kind of waited further until she was right in the action.
She was about ready to, help jump me. Not baptized herself, but
it's pretty cool. You did get baptized at the same place, right? The same reservoir, right? So
that's awesome. Great memories, and I know there are many, many great memories in the future. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your faithfulness to God. Really appreciate the time. Love you guys.
Yes, love you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for joining the Rob Skinner podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast, please hit the subscribe button and let your friends know about it and how to find it. Because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.